$4.2 million. That's what was burning alive on Sunset Boulevard at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Anthony Wright, tech billionaire, screaming into his phone while black smoke poured from his hypercar's engine. No one answered. No one came. Then a homeless man in torn clothes stepped through the crowd and said 5 words that would shatter everything. "Sir, I can fix it." What happened next exposed a truth more devastating than any engine failure some brilliant society decided to erase. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button. This story will challenge everything you think you know about success and failure. Drop a comment with your city below so I can see how far this message travels. Now let's begin. Get away from my car. That's how it started. Not with gratitude, not with hope, with rage. Thomas Johnson stood 3 feet from a burning hypercar worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, and the man screaming at him didn't see a solution, he saw a problem. Thomas was used to that. When you've been invisible for 7 years, you learn which battles to fight and which to let go. But not this one. "Sir," Thomas said again, voice steady, despite the heat radiating off the Valkyrie AMR Pro's failing cooling system. "I can fix it. You've got maybe 6 minutes before the lithium cells cascade. After that, it's not a car anymore, it's a bomb." The crowd pressed closer, phones raised. This was content. Drama. A homeless man versus a billionaire. Someone would get a viral video out of this, regardless of who got hurt. Anthony Wright, 42 years old, self-made Forbes 400 owner of quantum dynamics technologies, looked at Thomas the way you'd look at a cockroach suggesting it could perform surgery. "Security." Anthony's voice cracked. "Get this. Get him away from here." 2 men in black suits moved forward. Thomas didn't step back. "The problem's in the secondary coolant relay," Thomas said louder now. "The bypass valve stuck closed. Pressure's building in the heat exchanger. You smell that? That's not just burning oil, that's titanium alloy beginning to fatigue. You've got a choice, Mr. Wright. Let me help or watch this car explode on live television." Anthony's face went white. Not because of the threat, because of the accuracy. "How the hell do you know about the secondary relay?" Anthony's tone shifted. Still hostile, but something else crept in. Fear maybe, or recognition. Thomas met his eyes. "Because I designed it." Silence. The kind of silence that swallows sound. The crowd stopped murmuring. A woman holding her phone lowered it slightly. Even the security guards hesitated. Anthony laughed sharp, bitter, disbelieving. "You designed it. You." A homeless man on the street designed the proprietary cooling system in a $4 million hypercar. "Not the car," Thomas corrected. "The prototype. Aerotech Industries 2011. We called it Project Icarus. Your company bought the patents 3 years later when Aerotech collapsed. You rebranded the technology, made billions. I made nothing." Anthony's jaw tightened. "I don't know what con you're running, but—" "Memo 47 Alpha," Thomas interrupted. "Internal designation for the thermal stress flaw we couldn't solve before the buyout. We buried it in the documentation. Marked it low priority because we couldn't afford the redesign. The fracture point occurs at 347 degrees Celsius, specifically in the tertiary junction where the coolant crossfeeds. You know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you?" The color drained from Anthony's face. Thomas saw it, the flicker of recognition, the micro-expression of someone hearing a truth they thought was buried forever. "Who are you?" Anthony whispered. "Someone you forgot existed," Thomas said. "Now do you want my help or not?" A phone chimed, then another. Someone in the crowd gasped. "Oh my God!" a young woman said, scrolling frantically. "I found him. Dr. Thomas Johnson. MIT, 14 patents. He was on the cover of Tech Innovators magazine in 2010. She held up her phone. The crowd leaned in. There on the screen, a younger Thomas, clean-shaven in a pressed suit, holding an award. The caption read, "The mind behind tomorrow's thermal technology." "That's him," someone else confirmed. Holy hell, that's actually him. The murmuring intensified. Phones moved faster, searching, comparing, confirming. The story was writing itself in real time. Anthony pulled out his phone. His hands shook as he dialed. Dr. Chen, he said when the line connected. I need you to verify something, now. Anthony, I'm in the middle of... Is there a Thomas Johnson who worked on Project Icarus at Aerotech? The pause on the other end stretched too long. Eleanor, answer me. Yes. Dr. Eleanor Chen's voice came through the speaker clear enough for Thomas to hear. Dr. Thomas Johnson, lead thermal engineer. He held 14 patents when I last worked with him. Brilliant mind. Absolutely brilliant. Why are you asking about Thomas? Because he's standing in front of me claiming he can save a car that's about to explode. Another pause. Longer this time. Put him on, Eleanor said. Anthony held out the phone. Thomas stared at it like it might bite him. Thomas. Eleanor's voice softened. Is that really you? Thomas took the phone. Hello, Eleanor. My God, we thought, where have you been? Around, Thomas said simply. The car, Eleanor said. Anthony's car. Can you fix it? Yes. Then do it. And Anthony. Her voice hardened. If you don't let him, you're a bigger fool than I thought. She hung up. Anthony's face went through several emotions at once: shock, confusion, anger, embarrassment. He looked at Thomas like seeing him for the first time. You've got 5 minutes, Anthony said quietly. If you're wrong. I'm not wrong, Thomas said. He moved toward the car. The crowd parted. Thomas knelt beside the hypercar's engine bay, heat washing over him in waves. His hands, calloused, scarred from years of surviving on streets moved with surgical precision. The memory hit him without warning. Aerotech Industries, 7 years ago. Conference Room B. We're filing Chapter 11, the CEO said, not looking at any of them. Effective immediately. Thomas had stood there holding the prototype specs he'd worked on for 3 years. What about the patents? Sold. Package deal. Quantum Dynamics made an offer. For how much? That's confidential. Those are my patents. I have a right. You signed the employee agreement, Dr. Johnson. Everything you create belongs to Aerotech, and now it belongs to them. Thomas remembered the exact weight of those papers in his hands. Remembered walking out of that building knowing his life's work would make someone else rich while he had nothing. He remembered the eviction notice 3 months later, the divorce papers 6 months after that, the first night in a shelter 8 months after that. And he remembered the worst part, not the losing everything, the forgetting. How quickly the industry forgot his name, his face, his contributions. How quickly brilliance became invisible the moment it wasn't profitable. I need a flathead screwdriver, needle nose pliers, and something to seal a microfracture, Thomas said, voice steady. You got tape in that car? Anthony stared. Tape? You're going to fix a $4 million car with tape? Unless you've got a micro welder and a thermal paste compound handy. Yes. Tape. Move. A teenager in the crowd bolted toward a nearby auto parts store. The rest pressed closer, filming everything. Thomas heard fragments of commentary. This is insane. Someone call the news. Already trending on Twitter. How many followers does he have? Thomas tuned it out. His fingers found the relay valve access panel. The metal was hot enough to burn, but he'd worked in worse conditions. You learn things living on the street, pain tolerance, for instance. How to ignore discomfort when survival depends on focus. There, he muttered. Graphite scoring on the seal. Pressure buildup caused a hairline fracture just like I predicted it would. He looked up at Anthony. When's the last time you had this serviced? 3 weeks ago. Full diagnostic. Cost me $8 grand. Then they missed it, Thomas said flatly. Or they saw it and didn't want to tell you the fix would cost $60,000. Easier to kick the problem down the road. Hope it fails after the warranty expires. Anthony's face darkened. I'll sue them. Get in line, Thomas said. Half the industry's built on planned obsolescence and deferred maintenance. You're not special. Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. The teenager returned breathless, carrying a toolbox. Got everything. The store owner said it's free if this works. It'll work, Thomas said. He went to work. The crowd fell silent, watching this homeless man disassemble a hypercar engine with the confidence of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery. Thomas isolated the valve, examined the fracture under the afternoon sun. The crack was hairline thin, barely visible but catastrophic. One more heat cycle, and the whole system would have failed. Explosion, fire, possibly fatalities if the lithium cells ruptured near the fuel line. Hand me that pencil, Thomas said to the young woman who'd found his photo. What? Your pencil? The one behind your ear. She handed it over, bewildered. You're really him. From the magazine. Was him, Thomas corrected. Past tense. He broke the pencil, extracted the graphite core, and crushed it into fine powder using the flat side of the screwdriver. Mixed it with the tape adhesive on his palm. Why graphite? Someone called out. Thomas didn't look up. Graphite's a natural conductor and lubricant. It'll fill the microfracture conduct heat away from the stress point and create a temporary seal. Won't last forever, maybe 500 miles, but it'll get him home without dying in a fireball. He applied the compound to the fracture with the precision of a watchmaker. 3 layers, each one thinner than the last. Then he manually cycled the valve open, closed, feeling for resistance, listening for abnormalities. The crowd had grown. 50 people. 100. Traffic slowed. Someone had called a news van. Thomas sealed the access panel, wiped his hands on his jeans, leaving black streaks. Start the engine, he said. Anthony hesitated. If you're wrong, then we both die, and you can sue me in whatever afterlife accepts billionaires. Start it. Anthony pressed the ignition. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath. Then the engine turned over. Smooth, quiet, perfect. The purr of a $4 million machine healed by graphite and electrical tape. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, whistles. Phones thrust higher, capturing the moment a homeless man did what a team of certified technicians couldn't. Holy shit. He did it. Somebody get this man a job. Thomas stood slowly. His knees cracked too many nights on concrete. He wiped his hands again, but the grease wouldn't come off. It never really did. Anthony stood beside his car, speechless. Around him, the crowd filmed, posted, shared. The story was already viral, already spreading across platforms like wildfire. How? Anthony started. Graphite conducts heat and fills microfractures, Thomas explained. The tape provides structural support. Temporary fix may be good for 500 miles if you're gentle. You'll need a proper replacement valve OEM part, not aftermarket, and a full system flush. The contamination from the fracture will circulate through your coolant lines. Get it done within a week, or you'll be replacing the entire cooling system. He handed back the tools. And get better mechanics. The ones you have now nearly killed you. Anthony took the tools like they were holy relics. I don't understand. If you can do this, if you're who doctor Chen says you are, how did you end up on the streets? The crowd quieted, leaning in for the answer. Thomas smiled, and it wasn't kind. You really want to know? Yes. Because your company bought my patents for pennies on the dollar when Aerotech went bankrupt. Because the industry decided I was too expensive to keep around. Because I got sick, lost my insurance, couldn't afford medication, and missed 3 weeks of work. Because my wife left when the money ran out. Because landlords don't care about your credentials when you can't pay rent. Because every job I applied for wanted someone younger, cheaper, more convenient. His voice never rose, never cracked. Just stated facts like reading a grocery list. Because society decided I was disposable the moment I stopped being profitable. That answer your question, Mr. Wright? Anthony's face crumpled. Jesus Christ. He's not here either, Thomas said. But you can try the shelter if you want to ask him about it. Someone in the crowd was crying. A man in a business suit had his hand over his mouth. The woman who'd found Thomas's photo was staring at him like he'd just walked through fire. A news reporter pushed through the crowd. Dr. Johnson, Channel 7 News. Can we get a statement? No, Thomas said. Sir, you just saved a $4 million car with tape and a pencil. People are going to want to know. People are going to want a feel-good story, Thomas interrupted. They're going to want to believe one viral video fixes systemic failure. It doesn't. Nothing changes tomorrow. I'll still be homeless. You'll still look past people like me. This, he gestured at the crowd, this is entertainment, not transformation. The reporter's smile faltered. Anthony stepped forward. What if I could change that? Thomas turned to face him. With what money? A job? Charity? With opportunity, Anthony said quietly. Come to my office tomorrow. 9 a.m. Please. I don't have clean clothes for your office, Mr. Wright. I'll send someone. Where are you staying? Thomas pointed south. St. Michael's Shelter, 3 blocks that way. Ask for the tent city behind it. I'm the blue tarp, 2nd row. The news camera swung to follow his gesture, captured the direction. The reporter made a note. Anthony looked like he might be sick. I'll send someone, first thing in the morning. Send whoever you want, Thomas said. I'll be there or I won't. He turned to walk away. The crowd parted again, but this time differently. Someone touched his shoulder, gentle, respectful. A man pressed a $20 bill into his hand. Thank you, the man whispered, for showing us we've been blind. Thomas pocketed the money without comment and kept walking. Thomas, Anthony called after him. Thomas stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you, for the car, for not letting me burn. I didn't do it for you, Thomas said over his shoulder. I did it because a burning car on Sunset Boulevard could have hurt innocent people. They don't deserve to suffer for your negligence. He walked away, leaving Anthony Wright standing beside his $4 million hypercar, surrounded by cameras and questions, finally understanding that the most valuable thing he'd almost lost today wasn't made of carbon fiber and titanium. It was the knowledge he'd been standing on, built from profited by without ever seeing the man who created it. By 6 p.m., Thomas Johnson was the #1 trending topic on every social media platform. #HomelessGenius. Dr. Thomas Johnson. The man. They forgot. The video had 40 million views. News outlets scrambled for the story. Interviews were requested. Book deals floated. A GoFundMe hit $200,000 in 3 hours. Anthony sat in his penthouse office 60 floors above the city, watching the coverage on 6 different screens. His assistant knocked. Sir, the PR team wants to know how to handle this. Handle what? The optics. You're trending alongside him. Some of the comments are they're calling you complicit in his homelessness, saying quantum dynamics exploited Aerotech's collapse. Anthony closed his eyes. Did we... Sir, did we exploit them? When we bought those patents? His assistant shifted uncomfortably. Legal said it was a standard acquisition. Below market value, but within acceptable... I didn't ask what legal said. I asked if we exploited them. Silence. Pull the Aerotech acquisition files, Anthony said quietly. All of them. I want to know exactly what we paid and what those patents were worth. I want to know who we bought them from and where they ended up. I want names, amounts, everything. Sir, that was 7 years ago. Then it should be well documented. Get me the files by midnight. His assistant left. Anthony turned back to the screens. On CNN, they were interviewing a former Aerotech employee. Thomas was the best we had. When the company folded, we all thought he'd land somewhere better. Find out he's been on the streets this whole time, it's devastating. On Fox, a tech analyst explained the cooling system Thomas had designed. This technology is in everything now. Military drones, satellites, high-performance vehicles. The man who invented it is homeless. That should terrify us. On MSNBC, they were showing Thomas's patents. 14 of them. Estimated value, $12 million. Amount Thomas received, 0. Anthony's phone rang. Eleanor Chen. "You saw," he said. "The whole world saw Anthony. What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet. Figure it out fast. Because right now you look like every other billionaire who got rich standing on someone else's back. And Thomas looks like the truth everyone's been trying not to see." She hung up. Anthony stared at the city below. Lights stretching to the horizon. Millions of people. How many of them invisible? How many brilliant minds discarded because the system found them inconvenient? How many Thomas Johnsons were out there forgotten? His computer chimed. Email from legal. Subject: Aerotech acquisition documents. Anthony opened it. Started reading. And with every page, the sickness in his stomach grew worse. 3 blocks south, in a tent that leaked when it rained, Thomas Johnson sat on a sleeping bag that smelled like mildew and old coffee. His hands still smelled like engine grease. Around him, 43 other forgotten people tried to sleep while traffic hummed nearby. His phone, a cracked iPhone 6 he'd found in a dumpster 2 years ago, wouldn't stop vibrating. Notifications. Hundreds of them. Thousands. He'd been tagged in videos from 17 countries. Someone had started a petition, "Give Dr. Thomas Johnson the recognition he deserves." It had 400,000 signatures. A woman in the tent beside him leaned over. "Tommy, you okay?" Her name was Carol, 63 years old, former accountant. Lost everything in a medical bankruptcy. She'd been living in Tent City for 4 years. "I'm fine, Carol." "You're on the news, baby. They're saying you're some kind of genius." "I'm the same person I was yesterday." "Yesterday, nobody was watching," Carol said gently. "Today they are. What are you going to do?" Thomas looked at his phone, at the messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Former colleagues, old friends, reporters, strangers offering help, money jobs, salvation. "I don't know," he admitted. "You gonna meet with that billionaire tomorrow?" "Maybe." "You should," Carol said. "Not for him, for us, for everyone here. Show them we're not invisible. Show them what they threw away." Thomas thought about that. About representation. About what his face on television meant for the 43 people living in tents behind St. Michael's shelter. "Okay," he said. "I'll go." Carol smiled. "Good. Now get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." But Thomas didn't sleep. He lay in his tent, listening to the city breathe, watching the lights of passing cars paint shadows on the blue tarp above him. He thought about the equation that governed thermal dynamics in closed systems. He thought about the cooling relay he designed 14 years ago sitting in a lab at MIT, believing his work would change the world. He'd been right about that. It had changed the world, just not for him. Tomorrow he'd walk into quantum dynamics technologies. He'd face the man who'd profited from his brilliance. He'd see if anything had actually changed, or if this was just another performance charity, as spectacle redemption as content. But tonight, Thomas Johnson, doctor, engineer, father of innovations that powered half the tech industry, closed his eyes in a tent city and let himself believe just for a moment that maybe society was ready to see him again. Not as a problem to be managed, not as a feel-good story to be consumed, but as what he'd always been. Brilliant, valuable, human. The truth everyone had been trying not to see, until it saved their lives, until it couldn't be ignored anymore. until a man they'd made invisible became the only one who could see the solution they desperately needed. And tomorrow, the world would have to decide, was this moment of recognition enough, or was it finally time to change the system that made invisibility possible in the first place? The answer, Thomas knew, would determine everything that came next. The morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Thomas woke at 5:30, same as always. Survival on the streets teaches you to rise before the city does, before the police sweep through, before the morning crowd starts staring, before the world decides whether you're worth acknowledging today. But today was different. A black Mercedes pulled up to the tent city at 6:45 a.m. The driver stepped out holding a garment bag and a pair of polished shoes. Dr. Johnson. Every head in Tent City turned. Thomas stood slowly, his back aching from another night on a thin sleeping bag over concrete. That's me. Mr. Wright sent me. He asked me to bring you these and to drive you to the office. The driver held out the garment bag. There's a shower facility at the gym 2 blocks north. Mr. Wright arranged guest access. Thomas took the bag. It was heavier than he expected. Quality fabric, real quality. Tell Mr. Wright I'll be ready in an hour. The driver nodded and waited by the car. Thomas walked to the communal area where Carol was making instant coffee on a camp stove. Told you, she said, smiling. Big day. We'll see, Thomas replied. At the gym, Thomas stood under hot water for the first time in 3 weeks. The shelter had showers, but they were cold and crowded, and you had 5 minutes before someone pounded on the door. This was different. Private. Endless. He watched 7 years of street grime circle the drain and wondered if redemption was really this simple: just wash it away, put on nice clothes, pretend the gap never existed. The suit fit perfectly. Charcoal gray. Italian wool. The shoes were leather broken in just enough to be comfortable. Someone had done their homework. Someone had checked his old measurements. His preferences had cared enough to get the details right. Thomas looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Dr. Thomas Johnson, MIT graduate. 14 patents. The man from the magazine cover. Not the invisible ghost he'd become. He met the driver outside at 7:45. The Mercedes glided through morning traffic like it owned the road. Thomas watched the city pass the coffee shops filling with people who had jobs to get to the boutiques that wouldn't open for hours. The distance between his tent and this leather interior so vast it might as well be measured in light years. Nervous? The driver asked. Should I be? Mr. Wright's been up all night. Read every document from the Aerotech acquisition. I've worked for him 6 years, never seen him like this. Oh. Like what? Shaken, the driver said quietly. Like he just found out everything he built is resting on sand. They pulled into the underground garage of Quantum Dynamics Technologies at 8:15. Thomas stepped out into air-conditioned silence. The building rose 60 floors above them, glass and steel, and ambition built on innovations that had once existed only in his mind. The elevator moved so smoothly, Thomas barely felt it. Floor numbers climbed. 20, 30, 40. The driver pressed 59. Executive level, he said. Mr. Wright's waiting in the main conference room. The doors opened onto a reception area that probably cost more than Thomas had earned in his entire career at Aerotech. Marble floors, original art on the walls. A receptionist who smiled like she'd been trained to smile at everyone, even the formerly homeless. Dr. Johnson, she said warmly. Mr. Wright is expecting you. Right this way. She led him down a corridor lined with awards, industry recognition, innovation prizes, patents framed and displayed like trophies. Thomas recognized 3 of them: his designs, his breakthroughs, his sleepless nights made tangible and profitable for someone else. The conference room door was open. Anthony Wright stood at the window looking out over the city. He turned when Thomas entered. He looked terrible, circles under his eyes, tie loosened. The confident billionaire from yesterday, replaced by someone who'd seen a truth he couldn't unsee. You came, Anthony said. Your driver was persuasive. I read the files. All of them. Every document from the Aerotech acquisition. Anthony's voice was hollow. Do you know what we paid for your 14 patents? No, they never told us. $87,000 for all 14. The legal team justified it as a bulk distress purchase. Fair market value for a bankrupt company. Anthony laughed bitterly. Those patents are currently valued at $42 million. We've generated over $300 million in revenue from the technology. You got nothing. Thomas said nothing. The employees were let go without severance. Anthony continued. The CEO and board took golden parachutes. Everyone who actually created the value walked away with empty pockets and no prospects. And I profited from that. Built an empire on it. Congratulations, Thomas said flatly. You mastered capitalism. Don't, Anthony said. Don't let me off that easy. I need to understand. I need to know how you went from leading innovation at Aerotech to living in a tent behind a shelter. Tell me, please. Thomas walked to the window. 60 floors below the city moved people rushing to meetings, to appointments, to lives that made sense. He'd been down there once. Part of that movement. Part of the machine that kept everything running. I got sick, Thomas said. Nothing dramatic. Chronic condition. Needed medication to manage it. But Aerotech was cutting costs before the bankruptcy. They changed insurance providers. The new plan didn't cover my medication. Cost went from $30 a month to $800. Jesus. I tried to work through it. Lasted 3 weeks before I collapsed at my desk. They put me on medical leave, unpaid. When I came back, they'd restructured my department. My position was eliminated. They offered me a junior role at half my salary. Thomas's reflection stared back at him from the glass. I took it. I had bills, a mortgage, a wife who'd married a rising star, not a demoted engineer. What happened? 6 months later, Aerotech filed Chapter 11. Everyone laid off. I applied everywhere. 200 applications. Got 3 interviews. You know what they all said? You're overqualified. Translation: you're too old, too expensive, too much liability. They wanted fresh graduates. They could pay half as much and work twice as hard. Anthony sat down heavily. Your wife. Left after the eviction notice. Took our daughter. I don't blame her. She signed up for stability. I couldn't provide it anymore. Thomas turned from the window. I lived in my car for 2 months. Then the car got repossessed. Shelter after that. Then the tent city when the shelter hit capacity. That was 7 years ago. And every single day I watched technology I created make other people rich while I scrounged for enough money to eat. The silence in the room was deafening. Anthony's hands were shaking. I don't know how to fix this. You can't, Thomas said simply. It's not about me. It's about a system that treats human beings as disposable resources. You fix me, give me a job, a salary, a place to live, and nothing changes. There are 43 other people in that tent city. Thousands more across this city. Millions across the country. How many of them are brilliant? How many could change the world if someone gave them a chance? Then what do I do? Thomas looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the guilt, the confusion, the desperate need to transform horror into action. You asked me to come to an investor meeting, Thomas said. When? 10 o'clock, 30 minutes from now. Then let's start there. Show them what invisible looks like when you finally bother to see it. Anthony stood. You'll do it. I'll do it. Not for you. For Carol, who used to be an accountant before medical bankruptcy destroyed her life. For Marcus, who's a veteran with PTSD that the VA abandoned. For every person society decided wasn't worth the investment. You want to make this right? Then don't make me the exception. Make me the beginning. Anthony extended his hand. Thomas looked at it for a long moment before shaking it. There's one condition, Thomas said. Name it. Whatever happens in that meeting, whatever you offer me afterward, I'm keeping my tent. I'm staying at the shelter. I'm not abandoning the people who treated me like a human being when the rest of the world couldn't be bothered. Anthony's face showed surprise, then respect. Understood. At 9:55, Thomas followed Anthony into a conference room that held 15 of the wealthiest investors in the tech industry. Men and women in $1,000 suits with portfolios worth billions who controlled the flow of capital that determined which innovations lived and which died. They looked at Thomas with polite confusion. "Anthony," a silver-haired man said slowly. "Who's this?" "This," Anthony said, "is Dr. Thomas Johnson, the man who designed the thermal management systems that account for 60% of our revenue. The man whose innovations made this company possible. And until yesterday, he was living in a tent behind St. Michael's shelter." The room went still. "I asked him here because I realized we have a problem," Anthony continued. "Not a technical problem, a moral one. We've built a company on technology we acquired for pennies on the dollar from people we never acknowledged. We've profited from brilliance we didn't create and didn't compensate. And I won't continue that pattern." "Anthony?" A woman in the back said carefully, "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we listen. Dr. Johnson has reviewed our current development pipeline. He has insights that our entire engineering team missed. I'm proposing we hear what he has to say." Thomas stepped forward. Someone handed him a remote. The presentation appeared on the screen behind him, technical diagrams of quantum dynamics' next-generation cooling system scheduled for release in 6 months. "This won't work," Thomas said simply. A man in the front row bristled. "That's been in development for 2 years. We've invested $40 million, and it won't work," Thomas repeated. "The cross-flow integration at junction 7 creates a resonance frequency that'll cause catastrophic vibration under sustained load. You'll get maybe 200 hours of operation before mechanical failure. It'll pass your lab tests because your lab tests don't simulate real-world stress over time, but in actual deployment it'll fail, spectacularly." "That's impossible," the man said. "We have the best engineers." "You have engineers who've never lived with consequences," Thomas interrupted. "Who've never had to make something work with limited resources. Who've never had to improvise solutions because failure means not eating that week. Your engineers are brilliant, I'm sure, but they're missing perspective." He clicked to the next slide. "Here's the fix. Redirect the coolant flow through a secondary buffer chamber. Increases material cost by $12 per unit, adds 0.3 seconds to assembly time, but eliminates the resonance issue entirely. Your failure rate drops from projected 47% over 3 years to under 2%. Your warranty claims drop by $30 million. Your reputation stays intact." The room was silent. The silver-haired man leaned forward. "Show me the math." Thomas did. 20 minutes of equation simulations, stress analysis. The investors watched mesmerized as a homeless man rewrote 2 years of development work in real time. When he finished, the woman in the back spoke first. "Dr. Johnson, what would it take to bring you on board as Chief Innovation Officer?" "No," Thomas said. "Excuse me. I'm not interested in a job. I'm interested in changing how you find talent, how you value it, how you treat it." Thomas looked around the room. "You're all sitting on billions of dollars. You fund startups, invest in innovation, claim you want to change the world. But you're blind to brilliance that doesn't come packaged the way you expect it." "What are you suggesting?" another investor asked. "A fund, independently managed, dedicated to finding overlooked talent people who fell through the cracks, who got discarded by the system, who have skills but no access. Give them resources, training, opportunity, not charity. Investment. Real investment with real expectations and real compensation." "How much are we talking?" Thomas looked at Anthony. $50 million to start. Managed by people who understand what it means to be invisible. Prioritizing talent that traditional recruitment would never see. And I want it structured so the people we help actually benefit: equity stakes, patent ownership, fair compensation. None of this work for hire exploitation." The silver-haired man laughed. You want us to fund our own disruption. I want you to fund the next generation of innovation before your competitors figure out they've been ignoring the same talent pool you have, Thomas corrected. You think you're the only ones watching that video from yesterday? Every tech company in the world just got a wake-up call. The question is, who moves first? The room erupted in whispered conversations. Anthony watched it unfold, something like pride crossing his face. The woman in the back stood. I'm in, 10 million. The silver-haired man nodded slowly. Make it 15 from me, but I want quarterly reviews. This has to be sustainable, not symbolic. One by one, the investors committed. 50 million became 75, then 90. By the time the meeting ended, they'd pledged $120 million to the Talent Recovery Innovation Fund. Thomas stood at the front of the room watching people who'd never seen him yesterday write checks that could change thousands of lives. Dr. Johnson, the silver-haired man said as people filed out. I'm Richard Chen, Eleanor's father. She called me last night, told me what you did with Anthony's car, told me what you've been through. He extended his hand. I'm sorry for what happened, for what we all allowed to happen. Thomas shook his hand. Don't apologize. Make it different. We will, Richard promised, starting now. After they left, Anthony and Thomas stood alone in the conference room. You just turned down Chief Innovation Officer, Anthony said. Do you know what that position pays? I can guess. Then why? Because accepting it would have made this about me. About one success story everyone can point to and say, see, the system works. But the system doesn't work. It's broken. And it needs people who remember what broken feels like to fix it. Anthony nodded slowly. What do you need to make this fund happen? I need people I trust. Carol from the tent city. She's got a finance degree and 30 years of accounting experience. Marcus has logistics expertise from the military. There's a woman named Sarah who used to run a nonprofit before funding dried up. Start there. Build a team of people who know what it means to be discarded. They'll find the talent nobody else sees. Done. What else? Office space. Not here. Somewhere accessible. Somewhere people won't feel intimidated walking through the door. And I need you to stay out of it. This can't be a quantum dynamics initiative. It has to be independent. Real. Credible. You don't trust me. Thomas met his eyes. I don't trust power that hasn't been accountable. Prove you've changed. Then we'll talk about trust. Anthony absorbed that. Fair enough. Anything else? Yes. That GoFundMe that hit $3 million overnight, donate it to St. Michael's Shelter. All of it. They've been keeping people alive with no recognition and no support. They deserve it more than I do. Thomas? I didn't ask for that money. I don't want it. Use it where it matters. Anthony pulled out his phone, typed for a moment. Done. 3.2 million to St. Michael's, anonymously matched by Quantum Dynamics. 6 million total. Thomas felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope. Not quite trust. But maybe the beginning of both. There's one more thing, Anthony said quietly. Your daughter, Melissa. She's in college now, UC Berkeley, engineering program. She saw the video yesterday. She's been trying to reach you. Thomas went very still. How do you know that? Because she called my office this morning. Said she's been looking for you for 3 years. Lost contact when you moved. She wants to see you. 7 years. 7 years since Thomas had heard his daughter's voice. Since he'd been anything other than the failure her mother had left behind. Did you give her my number? I told her I'd ask you first. She gave me hers. Anthony held out a piece of paper. No pressure, but she's waiting. Thomas took the paper. Stared at 10 digits that represented everything he'd lost and everything he might reclaim. Thank you, he whispered. It's just a phone number. No, Thomas said. It's more than that. He left Quantum Dynamics at noon, still wearing the suit Anthony had sent, carrying a phone number and a promise that $120 million would go toward making sure no one else had to choose between innovation and survival. The Mercedes drove him back to Tent City. Thomas stepped out onto familiar ground, the smell of cooking food and unwashed bodies, the sound of traffic and radios, the sight of blue tarps and cardboard shelters that represented both failure and community. Carol was waiting. Well, how'd it go? We got funding. $120 million. We're starting a program to find people like us. Give them real opportunities, real investment. Carol's hand went to her mouth. Oh my God! I need you to help run it. Finance director, full salary benefits, equity stake. Tommy, I haven't worked in 4 years, I know. But you're brilliant, and you understand what we're trying to do. Will you help me? Carol's eyes filled with tears. Yes, God, yes. Marcus heard the news and whooped. Sarah, former nonprofit director, actually jumped. Within an hour, Tent City was celebrating people who'd been forgotten, finally seeing a path forward. But Thomas sat in his tent, holding a piece of paper with his daughter's phone number, and felt fear like he hadn't felt in years. What if she hated him? What if seeing him after all this time only reminded her of failure? What if his phone buzzed? A text from an unknown number. Dad? Mr. Wright gave me your number. I know it's been a long time. I know things are complicated. But I saw the video. I saw what you did. And I just want you to know I never stopped being proud of you. Can we talk? Thomas read it 3 times, then a 4th. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. He typed back, yes, when? The response came in seconds. Now I can drive down. I'm 2 hours away. Please. Thomas looked around Tent City. At the life he'd built from nothing. At the community that had kept him alive when everything else fell apart. At the future that was suddenly impossibly opening in front of him. He typed, I'll be here. And for the first time in 7 years, Thomas Johnson let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, invisible wasn't permanent. That maybe brilliance could be seen again. That maybe the system that had broken him could be rebuilt by people who remembered what breaking felt like. That maybe one viral video, one honest conversation, one billionaire's guilt transformed into action could actually start to change things. He sat in his tent and waited for his daughter, surrounded by people who'd never stopped seeing him, finally visible to a world that had looked away too long. The revolution, he realized, wouldn't be televised. It would be lived one recovered talent at a time, one second chance at a time, one decision to invest in brilliance instead of discarding it. And it started here, in a tent city, behind a shelter, with a man who'd survived 7 years of invisibility and refused to let it define him. Thomas looked at his phone, at his daughter's message, at the promise of $120 million in funding, at Carol's tears of joy and Marcus's celebration, and the 43 people who'd become his family when his real family had fallen apart. We're going to change everything, he whispered to no one and everyone. And somewhere in a penthouse office, 60 floors above the city, Anthony Wright looked at his reflection in the window and wondered if redemption was really possible for someone who'd built an empire on other people's forgotten dreams. The answer, both men knew, would be written in what came next. In whether promises became action. In whether visibility led to equity. In whether one moment of recognition could transform into a movement that made sure no one else's brilliance ever became invisible again. The city moved below them, indifferent and eternal. But something had shifted. Something had changed. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. 2 hours felt like 2 years. Thomas sat on an overturned crate outside his tent, watching the entrance to Tent City like a man waiting for judgment. Carol had offered to wait with him, but he'd asked for space. Some reunions needed to happen in private, even in a place where privacy didn't exist. At 2:17 p.m., a silver Honda Civic pulled up to the chain-link fence. The driver's door opened, and a young woman stepped out, 22 years old. Her mother's eyes, but his stubborn chin, wearing a Berkeley engineering hoodie that made Thomas's throat close up. Melissa stood frozen, staring at the tent city, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Thomas stood, raised his hand in a half-wave that felt absurd and inadequate. She saw him. Her whole body went rigid. For 5 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Melissa was running, stumbling over uneven ground, and Thomas was walking toward her, and they met in the middle of a dirt pathway, surrounded by 43 witnesses who pretended not to watch. "Dad," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "Melissa." They stood a foot apart, 7 years of silence between them, neither knowing who should move first. Melissa moved first. Threw her arms around him and held on like he might disappear if she let go. Thomas hugged her back, and something inside him that had been frozen for 7 years cracked open. He felt her shaking, or maybe he was shaking, and realized they were both crying right there in the middle of Tent City, not caring who saw. "I'm sorry," Melissa whispered into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I tried to find you. After we left, I tried. I called everyone we knew. Nobody would tell me where you were." "It's not your fault," Thomas said. "None of this is your fault. I saw the video, the whole thing, you fixing that car, and I couldn't believe I'd been at Berkeley studying engineering, and you were 3 hours away living in a tent, and I didn't know. I didn't know Dad." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Mom said you disappeared, said you didn't want to be found, but I knew that wasn't true. You wouldn't just leave. You wouldn't. I tried to stay in touch. The first year. But your mother, she was protecting you. From seeing me like this. I understood. I'm 22 years old. I didn't need protecting." Melissa's voice turned fierce. "I needed my father. I needed to know you were okay." Thomas gestured at the tent city around them. "Does this look okay to you? You're alive. You're here. You saved a $4 million car with a pencil and tape. You got 15 billionaires to pledge $120 million this morning." "Yeah, Dad. I'd say you're more than okay." "How do you know about the meeting?" "Mr. Wright called me after. Said you turned down Chief Innovation Officer. Said you're starting a fund instead. Said you're doing it from here." She looked around Tent City with something like awe. "He also said you're the most brilliant engineer he's ever met, and he's spent 7 years profiting off your work without knowing your name. His words, not mine." Thomas smiled despite everything. "He's trying to make amends." "Is it working?" "Ask me in 6 months." They walked toward his tent. People called out greetings. Carol waved. Marcus gave a thumbs up. Melissa took it all in: the makeshift community, the shared resources, the dignity carved out of circumstances that should have destroyed it. "Introduce me," she said. So Thomas did. Walked his daughter through Tent City, introducing her to 43 people who'd become his family when his real family fell apart. Carol hugged Melissa and cried. Marcus shook her hand, formally, military precision. Sarah showed her the community garden they'd built in the empty lot next door. "Your father kept us sane," Sarah told Melissa. "When people showed up here broken, ready to give up, he'd sit with them. Talk about thermodynamics or engineering principles or whatever science thing they needed to hear. Made them remember they were more than their circumstances. Saved lives, your dad, more than he knows." Melissa looked at Thomas with shining eyes. "You never stopped being a teacher." "Couldn't," Thomas said simply. "It's who I am." They sat in his tent, finally on sleeping bags that smelled like mildew and survival. Melissa held a cracked mug of instant coffee that Carol had insisted on making. "Tell me about Berkeley," Thomas said. "Tell me everything." So Melissa did. Talked about her classes, her research project on renewable energy systems, her professors who didn't know they were teaching the daughter of the man who'd pioneered half the technology they referenced. She talked about struggling with thermodynamics until something clicked, and she'd realized she was thinking about problems exactly the way her father used to explain them years ago. "You were always in my head," she said. "Every equation, every solution, every time a professor said something was impossible, and I figured out how to do it anyway. That was you. That was what you taught me." Thomas couldn't speak. "I want to help," Melissa continued. "With the fund, with whatever you're building. I'm graduating in 3 months. Let me be part of this. You should take a real job, 6-figure salary, stock options, everything I couldn't give you. I don't want what you couldn't give me. I want what you can teach me. How to see solutions nobody else sees. How to survive when the system tries to break you. How to build something real." She leaned forward. "Please, Dad, let me help." Thomas looked at his daughter, 22 years old. Brilliant, determined, offering to walk into the same world that had chewed him up and spit him out. "It won't be easy," he warned. "The fund the work we're doing, it's going to face resistance. Skepticism. People who think we're wasting money on lost causes." "Good," Melissa said. "Let them think that. We'll prove them wrong." Thomas smiled. "When did you get so fierce? I'm your daughter. What did you expect?" At 4 p.m., Anthony Wright's car pulled up again. The driver stepped out, followed by Anthony himself. "Dr. Johnson," Anthony called. "Sorry to interrupt. We have a situation." Thomas stood suddenly alert. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that involves 3 major news networks, the mayor's office, and a very angry group of landlords who want to shut down Tent City by end of week." The color drained from Thomas's face. "What? Your story went viral. St. Michael's Shelter got $6 million in donations. Now the city's paying attention, and not the good kind. Code enforcement, health violations, politicians who want to look tough on homelessness before the next election. They're coming for Tent City, Thomas, and they're coming fast." Carol appeared beside Thomas. "They can't do that. We've been here 4 years. Nobody cared before." "They care now," Anthony said grimly. "Or rather, they care about the optics. Can't have a viral success story living in a tent city. Makes the city look bad." "So they'd rather have us invisible again?" Marcus said, walking over. "Out of sight, out of mind." "That's exactly what they want." Anthony looked at Thomas. "But I have an idea. It's going to sound crazy." "Try me," Thomas said. "Buy the property, all of it. The empty lot the land Tent City sits on, everything. Turn it into something permanent. Transitional housing, job training facility, headquarters for the Talent Recovery Innovation Fund. Make it official. Make it legal. Make it impossible to shut down." Thomas blinked. "You want to buy an entire city block?" "I want us to buy it. The fund. First major project. We house people, we train them, we connect them to opportunities. It's not charity, it's infrastructure. Investment in human capital that every economist claims to value, but nobody actually funds." "How much?" Carol asked, her finance brain already working. $18 million for the land, another 12 for construction and renovation. 30 million total. We've got 120 pledged. It's doable." "It's insane," Thomas said. "It's necessary," Anthony countered. "You said the system's broken. Here's our chance to build something better. You in?" Thomas looked around Tent City, at Carol and Marcus and Sarah and 40 other people who'd built community out of nothing, at his daughter standing beside him ready to fight, at the empty lot where they'd planted vegetables because nobody stopped them. "We'd need approval from everyone here," Thomas said. "This is their home. They get a say." "Agreed. Full democratic process. But we need to move fast. The city's planning their sweep for Friday. Today's Tuesday. We have 3 days." Carol stepped forward. "I'll call a community meeting. Tonight. 6 p.m. We'll vote." Marcus nodded. "I'll spread the word." By 6 p.m., All 43 residents of Tent City had gathered in the community space, a covered area with mismatched chairs and a fire pit that served as their meeting ground. Anthony stood to one side, deliberately not taking the lead. Thomas addressed the group. "You all know what's happening. The city wants us gone. We have options. We can fight them legally, probably lose. We can scatter, find other places to live, lose this community. Or we can try something different." He explained Anthony's proposal: buying the land, building permanent housing, creating a training facility, making Tent City the foundation of something bigger. "It sounds good," a woman named Rita said cautiously. "Too good. What's the catch?" "The catch is, we'd have rules," Thomas said honestly. "Building codes, safety standards. We couldn't just do whatever we want anymore. It'd be structured, official. Some of you might not like that." "What about the people who can't work?" an older man asked. "The ones too sick or too broken. They getting kicked out when this becomes some job training program?" "No." Thomas's voice was firm. "Nobody gets kicked out. This is home first. Everything else is optional. You want job training, it's there. You want housing, and that's it. That's fine too. This isn't about forcing conformity. It's about providing options." "Who's in charge?" Marcus asked. "Because if it's some board of rich people making decisions about our lives, that's just a different kind of cage." "Community governance," Carol said. "Residents elect a board. We manage day-to-day operations. The fund provides financing and resources, but we control how it's used. It's in the proposal, I made sure of it." Anthony spoke up. "I'll be honest with you. I'm not doing this purely out of goodness. This is good PR for quantum dynamics. It's good optics for the fund. I benefit from this working, but that doesn't mean it's not real. It doesn't mean we're not committed. It just means everyone wins, which is how it should be." The group debated for an hour. Arguments for and against. Concerns about losing independence. Hope for stability. Fear of change. Desire for something better. Finally, Sarah called for a vote. All in favor of accepting the proposal and moving forward with the purchase and development. 38 hands went up. Opposed, 3 hands. Abstaining, 2. Sarah smiled. "Motion passes. We're doing this." The community erupted in cheers and nervous laughter. Carol hugged Marcus. Rita cried. The older man who'd asked about people too sick to work shook Thomas's hand with trembling fingers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not forgetting us." "Never," Thomas said. "We take care of our own." Anthony made calls immediately. By 9 p.m. he had lawyers drafting purchase agreements. By midnight the fund's board had approved the expenditure. By Wednesday morning they had an offer on the table. But the city moved faster. At 7 a.m. Wednesday, code enforcement arrived with police escort. They had eviction notices, health violation citations, orders to vacate within 24 hours. Thomas met them at the fence. "We're in the process of purchasing this property. You can't evict us from land we're buying." "Purchase isn't final," the lead inspector said. "Until it is, this is illegal encampment on city property. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, we clear the site." "There are 43 people living here. Where are they supposed to go?" "St. Michael's shelter has capacity." "It doesn't. That's why we're here." "Not my problem, sir. I have my orders." The inspector handed Thomas a stack of citations and walked away. Police lingered, making sure everyone understood the threat was real. Melissa appeared at Thomas's side. "What do we do?" "We accelerate everything." Thomas pulled out his phone, called Anthony. "We need that purchase finalized today. Not tomorrow. Today." "Thomas, it takes time to—" "We don't have time. They're evicting us tomorrow morning. If we don't own this land by then, everyone here is on the street." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'll make it happen. Give me 6 hours." Anthony Wright did what billionaires do when the system moves too slowly. He threw money at it. expedited title searches, rush processing fees, lawyers working overtime, phone calls to city officials who owed him favors. By 2 p.m. they had clear title. By 3 p.m. the purchase was complete. By 4 p.m. Thomas Johnson and Carol Martinez stood at the fence when code enforcement returned, this time with media in tow. "This is private property," Thomas said calmly. "We own it. Here's the deed." He held up the paperwork. The inspector's face went pale. "You're welcome to inspect for code violations," Carol added. "But you'll need to schedule an appointment with the property owners. That would be us." The media cameras captured everything. The inspector's confusion, Thomas's calm defiance. The moment a tent city became legitimized by the only thing America truly respects: property ownership. "This is still a health hazard," the inspector tried. "Unsafe conditions, which we'll be addressing through a comprehensive development plan," Thomas said. "We're converting this into transitional housing and a job training facility. Construction starts next week. You'll receive all the proper permits and documentation, but these people are not going anywhere. This is their home, and now it's legal." The inspector left without another word. The residents of Tent City, now the future site of the Talent Recovery Innovation Center, celebrated like they'd won a war, which in a way they had. But Thomas knew the real battle was just beginning. That night, Melissa stayed in Tent City, slept in her father's tent on a borrowed sleeping bag, surrounded by people who'd survived what most couldn't imagine. "This is what you've been doing," she said quietly. "All these years, not just surviving, building." "Trying to," Thomas said. "Doesn't always work, but you try anyway. Mom was wrong about you. Your mother did what she thought was best. I don't blame her for leaving. I blame a system that made leaving seem like the only option. Are you going to see her now that everything's changing?" Thomas considered that. "I don't know. A lot of hurt there. A lot of time passed. Some things don't get fixed just because circumstances change." "But some things do," Melissa said. "Like us." "Yeah," Thomas agreed. "Like us." Thursday morning, Anthony arrived with architects and contractors. They walked the property, taking measurements, making plans. The residents provided input: what they needed, what would work, what absolutely wouldn't. By Friday, they had preliminary designs: modular housing units, shared kitchen and bath facilities, a training center with computer labs and workshop space, green space, community areas. Everything designed with input from people who'd actually lived without these things. "This is going to cost more than $30 million, one architect warned. "Then we raise more," Anthony said. "This is the flagship. We do it right." News coverage intensified. Some praised the initiative. Others criticized it as gentrification displacement, wrapped in charity language, billionaires playing savior. Thomas did interview after interview, explaining the same thing over and over. This wasn't about saving people. It was about recognizing what was already there. "These people aren't broken," he told one skeptical reporter. "They're survivors of a system that values profit over human potential. We're not fixing them. We're providing infrastructure they should have had all along." The reporter wasn't convinced. "But isn't this just feel-good capitalism, rich people absolving guilt?" "Maybe," Thomas admitted. "But I'll take guilty billionaires building housing over indifferent ones building nothing. Progress doesn't require purity, it requires action." The interview went viral. So did the criticism. So did the support. By the end of the week, Thomas Johnson had become something he'd never wanted to be: a symbol of second chances, of resilience, of everything right and wrong with American capitalism. He hated it. "I'm an engineer," he told Melissa on Sunday night. "I solve problems. I don't do inspiration porn." "Too late," she said, showing him her phone. "You're a meme now. Look, homeless genius buys his own tent city. 60,000 retweets." Thomas groaned. But the attention brought results. 3 more major investors pledged funds. 2 universities offered research partnerships. A tech company donated equipment. The mayor suddenly supportive now that cameras were watching fast-tracked their permits. Within 2 weeks, construction began. Thomas stood at the fence, watching bulldozers prepare the ground, knowing that everything was about to change. Carol stood beside him. "Scared?" she asked. "Terrified," Thomas admitted. "What if this doesn't work? What if we're just recreating the same systems that failed us?" "Then we fail better," Carol said. "We learn, we adjust, but at least we're trying. That's more than most people do." Marcus joined them. "Meeting in 10 minutes. The board wants an update on hiring." The board, community elected. Carol as chair. Marcus as operations director. Sarah handling outreach. 3 other residents in specialized roles. Real governance, real power. They'd set up a temporary office in one of the larger tents. Laptops donated by Quantum Dynamics. Internet from a mobile hotspot. Paperwork organized in plastic bins. "We've got 200 applications for the first cohort," Sarah reported. "Former teachers, engineers, accountants. People with skills who fell through cracks. How do we choose?" "We don't," Thomas said. "We expand capacity. If we have 200 qualified people, we find resources for 200 people." "That's not sustainable," Carol warned. "We have to be realistic about—" "Realistic got us into tents," Thomas interrupted. "I'm done with realistic. We figure out how to make it work." They figured it out. Additional funding, partnerships with local colleges, remote work opportunities with companies willing to take a chance. Creative solutions to problems everyone else called impossible. By the end of month 1, they had 50 people in their first cohort. By month 2, the housing units were taking shape. By month 3, the first success stories emerged: a former graphic designer placed at a marketing firm, a laid-off programmer hired by a startup, a teacher returning to education after 5 years on the streets. Each success brought media attention. Each media story brought more funding. Each new dollar brought more opportunity. The cycle was working. But Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were still just putting bandages on a system that needed surgery. "We're helping individuals," he told Anthony during a site visit. "But we're not changing the structure that creates homelessness in the first place. Healthcare costs, housing costs, wage stagnation, inequality. We're not touching any of that." "You can't fix everything," Anthony said. "Watch me try," Thomas replied. And he did. Started speaking at conferences, writing op-eds, testifying before city council about housing policy, using his platform, unwanted as it was, to push for systemic change. Some people listened. Most didn't. But the Talent Recovery Innovation Center kept growing, kept proving that brilliance discarded by society could be reclaimed, reconnected, redeployed. And every person who walked through their doors who found housing and training and opportunity represented a small victory against a system that had decided they were disposable. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. And something Thomas had learned over 7 years in a tent was infinitely better than nothing. The construction continued. The community grew. The revolution, quiet, unglamorous, incremental, spread. One recovered life at a time. And in the middle of it all, Thomas Johnson worked 16-hour days, slept in a tent he refused to leave until housing was ready for everyone, and proved that the man society had made invisible could build something too important to ignore. The first housing units opened on a Tuesday in late spring, exactly 4 months after Thomas had fixed Anthony Wright's hypercar on Sunset Boulevard. They'd finished ahead of schedule, under budget, and with zero compromise on quality. Thomas stood outside Unit 1 as Carol inserted the key. Behind them, 37 people waited, the ones who'd survived Tent City longest, who'd held the community together when everything else fell apart. "You should have the first one," Carol said, holding out the key. "No," Thomas said firmly. "Rita, she's been here 6 years, longer than any of us." Rita stepped forward, hands shaking. 71 years old, former librarian, medical bankruptcy had taken her house 12 years ago. She'd lived in 3 different tent cities before this one. "I can't," she whispered. You can, Thomas said. You will. This is home, Rita. Real home. With walls and heat and a door that locks. Take it. Rita took the key, opened the door, walked into a small efficiency apartment with a kitchenette bathroom and enough space for a bed and dignity. She sat on the floor and sobbed. One by one, the others moved into their units, each one overwhelmed, each one disbelieving. Thomas watched them carry in their few possessions, everything they owned, fitting into garbage bags and backpacks, and felt the weight of how little it took to change a life. A safe place to sleep, running water, a door that locked. That's all most of them wanted. That's all they'd been denied. Marcus got Unit 7. Sarah took 12. Carol chose 15 closest to the administrative building that was still under construction. Thomas kept his tent. You're being stubborn, Melissa told him that night. There are units available. And there are people on the waiting list, Thomas replied. 200 applications. 50 housed so far. I'm not taking a unit while 150 people still need one. Dad, you're running this place. You need proper housing, an office, space to work. I have space to work. Thomas gestured at the laptop balanced on his knees, the paperwork spread across his sleeping bag. This is fine. This is insane. This is principle. Thomas looked at his daughter. The moment I start living differently than the people I'm supposed to be serving, I lose perspective. I lose credibility. I become just another person telling them how to live from a position of comfort. Melissa shook her head but didn't argue further. She'd learned that about her father these past 4 months. Once he committed to something, logic and reason became secondary to conviction. The next morning brought their first real crisis. James Chen, no relation to Eleanor, had been part of the first cohort. Former software engineer laid off at 53, couldn't find work for 2 years, lost everything. The fund had placed him at a mid-sized tech company 3 weeks ago. Good salary, benefits, everything he needed. He'd relapsed on day 19, showed up to work drunk, got fired immediately. Now he sat in the community center devastated, while Carol tried to figure out what to do. The company's threatening to pull their partnership, she told Thomas. They're saying we didn't properly vet him, that we're wasting their time with people who aren't ready. Thomas sat across from James. Tell me what happened. I couldn't handle it, James said quietly. The pressure, the expectations, everyone watching, waiting for me to fail. I went to a bar after work, told myself 1 drink. Next thing I know, it's 3 a.m. and I'm passed out in my car. You had 2 years sober. In a tent city, yeah. Nobody expects anything from you in a tent city. You can't disappoint anyone when they already think you're nothing. James looked at Thomas with hollow eyes. But in that office, wearing a suit, getting paid real money, I couldn't be that person. I couldn't be who they needed me to be. Thomas understood. God, did he understand? The weight of second chances. The fear that you were always one mistake away from losing everything again. What do you want to do? Thomas asked. I don't know. Give up, maybe. Stop pretending I can be fixed. You're not broken. The hell I'm not. You're a human being who struggled with addiction, who lost everything, who had 2 years of sobriety and then had a relapse. That doesn't make you broken. That makes you human. Thomas leaned forward. The question isn't whether you're broken. The question is whether you're done fighting. James was quiet for a long time. I don't want to be done. Then we try again. Different approach, more support. Therapy, AA meetings, check-ins. We build a structure that acknowledges the reality of recovery instead of pretending it's linear. The company won't take me back. Then we find a different company, one that understands recovery, or we create opportunities in-house where we control the environment. Thomas stood. You made a mistake, James. You don't get exiled for that. You get help. Carol pulled Thomas aside after James left. We can't save everyone who relapses. We don't have the resources. Then we get more resources. Thomas? No, I'm not building a program that throws people away the moment they struggle. That's what the rest of the world does. We're supposed to be different. We are different, but we also have to be sustainable. If companies won't work with us because they think we're placing high-risk candidates, then we find companies that understand risk and recovery are part of being human. Thomas interrupted. And if those companies don't exist, we create them. He called an emergency board meeting that afternoon. All 7 members crammed into the half-finished administrative building. We need to expand our model, Thomas said without preamble. We're placing people in traditional employment, which is good. But traditional employment has traditional expectations. Zero-tolerance policies, no second chances. We need to create our own opportunities, our own businesses, where we control the culture. That takes capital, Sarah said. A lot of it. We have $120 million in the fund, 60 of which is already committed to housing construction and operations, Carol countered. We can't just... We can, Thomas said. We need to. Because James isn't the only one who's going to struggle. Recovery isn't clean. Reintegration isn't simple. If we're serious about this, we need to build infrastructure that accommodates reality instead of demanding perfection. Marcus spoke up. What kind of businesses? Whatever matches our talent pool, light manufacturing, tech services, consulting. We have former teachers, we could run tutoring programs, former accountants, bookkeeping services, former engineers. Thomas smiled slightly. We could design things nobody else can figure out. This is mission creep, Carol warned. We started as a housing and training program. Now you want to become an economic development engine. I want to be whatever we need to be to make this work, Thomas said. Housing and training aren't enough if people can't sustain employment because the employment system is designed to exclude them. The board debated for 3 hours. Finally, they voted 5-2 in favor of exploring social enterprise development. Thomas called Anthony that night. I need another $50 million. Anthony laughed. Hello to you too. I'm serious. We need to expand, create our own employment opportunities, build businesses that can absorb people when traditional employment fails them. Thomas, you're already managing a construction project, a housing program, and a training pipeline. Now you want to start multiple businesses. Yes? Silence on the other end. Then, send me a proposal. If it makes sense, I'll bring it to the investors. Thomas worked for 48 hours straight. Melissa helped pulling data, building financial models, creating projections. By Thursday, they had a comprehensive plan for 6 social enterprises, each designed around the existing talent pool. Anthony presented it to the investors the following week. They committed $70 million. Construction on the business incubator started immediately. While that happened, Thomas and his team started with what they could do now, service-based businesses that required minimal infrastructure. Marcus launched a moving and logistics company, hiring former warehouse workers and drivers. Sarah started a consulting firm focused on nonprofit management, staffed by people who'd run organizations before life fell apart. Carol established a bookkeeping service. And Thomas, with Melissa's help, created a technical consulting group specializing in thermal management systems. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd invented the technology while working for Aerotech, who'd watched quantum dynamics profit from it while he lived in a tent, was now selling expertise in that same technology directly to companies who needed it. How does it feel? Melissa asked him. Consulting on systems you invented. Weird, Thomas admitted. But also right. Like I'm finally getting compensated for knowledge that should have been valued all along. Their first client was an aerospace manufacturer struggling with overheating in a satellite component. Thomas looked at their schematics for 20 minutes, identified the problem, and provided a solution that would have taken their engineering team 6 months to find. They paid him $30,000 for 4 hours of work. Thomas stared at the check. That's more than I earned in a year at Aerotech, he said quietly. That's what your expertise is worth, Melissa said. when you're not being exploited. He donated half to the fund, split the rest among the tent city residents who didn't have income yet, kept nothing for himself. "Dad," Melissa protested, "you need to save something. Build a financial cushion." "I have everything I need," Thomas said, gesturing at his tent. "This is fine. This is a tent. This is enough." But the business grew. More clients, more revenue. Within 2 months, the technical consulting group had 6 contracts and was generating $40,000 a month in profit. Marcus's moving company landed a contract with a property management firm. Sarah's consultancy got hired by 3 nonprofits. Carol's bookkeeping service was managing accounts for a dozen small businesses. The social enterprises were working, but success brought new problems. The media coverage intensified. Politicians started visiting wanting photo opportunities with the inspiring homeless people who'd pulled themselves up. Cameras everywhere, questions about sustainability, demands for metrics and data proving this wasn't just feel-good charity. Thomas hated every minute of it. "We're not a zoo," he snapped at a reporter who'd asked if she could interview residents about their journey from homelessness to employment. "People want to know the stories," the reporter said. "It's inspiring. It's exploitation. You want to make them perform their trauma for your audience's entertainment." "No." The reporter looked offended. "I'm trying to help. Coverage like this brings donation support. Coverage like this turns human beings into poverty porn," Thomas said. "You want to help. Write about the systemic failures that create homelessness in the first place. Write about healthcare costs, housing policy, wage stagnation. Don't write about how we're so inspiring for surviving what should never have happened." The interview ended badly. The article that ran painted Thomas as difficult and ungrateful. Social media erupted with opinions. Some defended him. Most didn't. "You need to be more diplomatic," Anthony said during their weekly check-in. "These reporters can make or break public support." "Then let them break it," Thomas said. "I'm not going to smile and nod while they reduce people's lives to heartwarming content." "You're being stubborn." "I'm being honest. There's a difference." Melissa sided with Anthony. "Dad, you need public support. That means playing the game sometimes." "I spent 7 years invisible because I wouldn't play games," Thomas said. "I'm not starting now." The tension built until it exploded during a city council meeting about expanding the program. Thomas was invited to present, told to keep it brief and optimistic. Focus on success stories. Make the council members feel good about supporting the initiative. He didn't. 4 months ago, I was living in a tent," Thomas started. "Not because I was lazy, not because I made bad choices, but because I got sick, lost my insurance, couldn't afford medication, and the entire system decided I was disposable. That's not an inspiring story. That's an indictment." The council members shifted uncomfortably. "You're here today because a video went viral. Because a billionaire felt guilty. Because enough people paid attention that ignoring homelessness became politically inconvenient. But that doesn't change the fact that there are still 60,000 people experiencing homelessness in this city. 60,000 people. You've failed." "Mr. Johnson," the council president interrupted. "We appreciate your passion, but nothing. You want to celebrate what we've built at the Talent Recovery Innovation Center, fine. Celebrate it. But don't pretend 50 people housed out of 60,000 is success. Don't pretend one privately funded program solves a crisis you created through policy choices." "We didn't create homelessness," a council member said defensively. "You absolutely did. Every time you voted against rent control, every time you prioritized development over affordable housing, every time you cut mental health services and addiction treatment, you created this. And now you want credit for not actively stopping someone else from trying to fix it." Thomas leaned forward. "You want to help change zoning laws, fund mental health services, cap rent increases, create actual policy solutions instead of relying on charity to paper over systemic failure." The room went silent. The council president cleared his throat. Thank you for your perspective, Mr. Johnson. We'll take it under advisement. Thomas left the chambers knowing he'd burned bridges, knowing he'd probably hurt the program's chances for city support, knowing he should have been diplomatic. He didn't care. Anthony called within an hour. What the hell was that? The truth. The truth just cost us potential city funding. 3 council members were ready to support an expansion grant. Now they're backing away. Then they weren't really committed to solving the problem. They just wanted to look like they were. Thomas, you can't alienate everyone who doesn't meet your purity standards. Politics requires compromise. And compromise is how we got a system where people die on the streets, while empty luxury apartments sit unused. Thomas shot back. I'm done compromising. I'm done being grateful for crumbs. Either people want to actually solve this or they don't. I'm not going to pretend symbolic gestures are enough. You're going to destroy everything we've built. Or I'm going to force people to confront why it needed to be built in the first place. They hung up, angry. Carol found Thomas in his tent an hour later. The board wants to talk. About removing me. About whether you're still the right person to lead this publicly. You're brilliant, Thomas. But you're also abrasive and uncompromising. And you're making enemies we can't afford. Good, Thomas said. If our survival depends on making nice with people who created this crisis, then we're already lost. The board meeting happened that night. All 7 members, plus Melissa and Anthony, on video conference. Thomas. Sarah began carefully. We support your values. We support your vision. But we need to think strategically about sustainability. The city council could shut us down if they wanted. Code enforcement, zoning violations. They have tools to destroy us. Then we make ourselves too important to destroy, Thomas said. We expand faster than they can respond. We build so much capacity employ, so many people generate so much economic activity that shutting us down becomes politically impossible. That's aggressive, Marcus said. Maybe too aggressive. Safe got us living in tents, Thomas replied. I'm done with safe. Carol spoke up. I understand your frustration, but we have to work within systems, even broken ones. Otherwise, we're just tilting at windmills. Don Quixote was right, though, Melissa said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. The windmills were monsters. Everybody else just couldn't see it. Maybe tilting at them was exactly the right thing to do. Thomas looked at his daughter with something like pride. We take a vote, he said. Board decides if I stay as public face of this organization or if someone else takes that role. I'll abide by whatever you decide. The vote was 4-3 to keep Thomas in place. Barely. But, Sarah added, you need a communications person. Someone who can translate your vision into language that doesn't alienate potential allies. Fine, Thomas agreed. But I'm not lying. I'm not pretending this is anything other than what it is: emergency intervention in a crisis that should have been prevented. They hired a communications director, former journalist, who'd gone homeless after a layoff and medical crisis. She understood both sides. She could translate Thomas's rage into actionable policy recommendations. It helped. Some. But the fundamental tension remained. Thomas refused to let people forget that the Talent Recovery Innovation Center existed because society had failed. That success stories were individual victories in a systemic war that was still being lost. 2 months after the city council disaster, Anthony requested a meeting. In person. Private. They met at the construction site after hours. The business incubator was nearly complete, 20,000 square feet of workshop and office space. I'm worried about you, Anthony said without preamble. Don't be. You're burning out, working 18-hour days, living in a tent when you have resources to do better, pushing everyone away who tries to help. I'm fine. You're not. And I recognize it because I've done the same thing. After my company nearly failed in the early days, I worked myself into the hospital, convinced myself that stopping meant failing. It almost killed me. Thomas was quiet. You've built something extraordinary here, Anthony continued. But you can't sustain it alone. You need to delegate. You need to rest. You need to accept help. The moment I accept comfort, I lose connection to why this matters. That's martyr complex talking, not leadership. Maybe martyrdom is what this requires. It's not. Anthony's voice was firm. It requires sustainability, building systems that outlast you, creating infrastructure that doesn't depend on one person's suffering to remain legitimate. Thomas sat on a stack of lumber. I'm afraid if I stop, if I ease up, we'll become just another non-profit patting ourselves on the back for helping a few people while ignoring the millions still suffering. Then build in accountability, create metrics, establish oversight. But don't sacrifice yourself on the altar of authenticity. That doesn't help anyone. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the construction site. My daughter's graduating next month, Thomas said finally. She wants to work here full-time. I keep telling her to take a corporate job. Get stability. She won't listen. I wonder where she gets the stubborn refusal to choose the easy path, Anthony said dryly. Thomas smiled slightly. Yeah. Let her help you. Let all of us help you. You started this, Thomas. But it's bigger than you now. That's success, not failure. Thomas knew Anthony was right. Knew he was heading toward collapse if he didn't change something. Knew the tent, the isolation, the relentless pace were taking a toll. But giving up the tent meant giving up the last physical reminder of where he'd come from. Meant accepting that he was different now from the people he served. Meant acknowledging distance that terrified him. I'll think about it, he said finally. Think fast, Anthony said. Because we're breaking ground on Phase 2 next month. Another 100 housing units. The waiting list is at 500 people now. This is growing beyond anything we imagined. You need to be healthy enough to lead it. Thomas nodded slowly. That night, he sat in his tent for the last time. Looked at the blue tarp that had sheltered him through rain and heat. The sleeping bag that smelled like 7 years of survival. The plastic bins that held everything he owned. Carol appeared at the tent entrance. Unit 23 just became available. Previous resident moved in with family. It's yours if you want it. Thomas looked at her. How'd you know I was ready? Because you've been sitting here for 3 hours staring at nothing. That's usually when you make big decisions. He stood. Started packing his things into a garbage bag. It took 4 minutes to pack 7 years of life. Carol helped him carry it to Unit 23. Small efficiency apartment. Same as all the others. Nothing special except it had walls, and a door that locked, and heat that worked. Thomas set his garbage bag down in the middle of the empty room. Feels wrong, he said. It's right, Carol said. You can't pour from an empty cup. You taught us that. Did I? Every day, whether you meant to or not. She squeezed his shoulder. Welcome home, Thomas. She left him alone in his new apartment. Thomas sat on the floor back against the wall and let himself feel something he hadn't allowed in years. Relief, not happiness, not quite, but the bone-deep relief of finally being safe. He called Melissa. I moved into an apartment. Oh, thank God, she said. Mom's going to be so relieved. Thomas went still. You've been talking to your mother. Yeah, the last few months. She saw everything on the news. She's been worried about you. She left me. She left a situation that was destroying her. There's a difference. She never stopped Dad. She never stopped loving you. She just couldn't survive the weight anymore. Thomas didn't know what to do with that information. She wants to see you, Melissa continued. If you're willing, no pressure. But she wants to apologize for leaving the way she did, for not trying harder to stay connected. 7 years. 7 years of silence and bitterness and believing he'd been abandoned. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Thomas said honestly. That's okay. Just know the door's open when you are ready. They talked for another hour. About her graduation next week. About her plans to start work at the Innovation Center. about the future that was finally starting to look different than the past. After they hung up, Thomas lay on the floor of his empty apartment and stared at the ceiling. He'd fixed a billionaire's car with a pencil and tape. He'd built a $120 million program from a tent city. He'd housed 50 people and employed 30 more. He'd created infrastructure that would outlast him. But he still didn't know how to fix the part of himself that believed comfort meant betrayal. Still didn't know how to bridge the gap between who he'd been and who he was becoming. Still didn't know if redemption was real, or just another performance for an audience that would eventually lose interest. Outside construction continued, the future being built one day at a time. Inside, Thomas Johnson tried to believe he deserved to live in it. The apartment stayed empty for 3 weeks. Thomas slept there, showered there, but he couldn't bring himself to make it home. No furniture, no pictures, just a sleeping bag on the floor and his laptop on a cardboard box. Melissa noticed during her graduation weekend. "Dad, this is depressing," she said, looking around the bare room. "You have money now. The consulting work is bringing in real income. Buy a bed at least." "Don't need one." "You're sleeping on the floor." "I've slept on worse." Melissa sat beside him on the sleeping bag. "You know what Mom used to say, that you had this thing where you'd punish yourself for things that weren't your fault. Like if you suffered enough, it would somehow balance the scales." Thomas didn't respond. "She was right, wasn't she? You're still doing it. Still convinced that comfort equals betrayal. That if you're not suffering, you're not legitimate. Your mother doesn't know me anymore. She knew you better than anyone. That's why she had to leave. She couldn't watch you destroy yourself and be powerless to stop it." Melissa's voice was gentle. "She loved you too much to stay and watch you die slowly." "She tell you that?" "She tells me a lot of things. We talk every week. She asks about you every time. Wants to know if you're eating, if you're safe, if you're happy." Thomas felt something crack in his chest. "I wouldn't know how to talk to her, after everything." "Then start with hello. See where it goes from there." The graduation ceremony was at Berkeley the next day. Thomas sat in the audience wearing the same suit Anthony had sent 7 months ago, watching his daughter cross the stage to receive her engineering degree. She'd graduated top of her class, full honors, job offers from 6 companies. She'd turned them all down to work at the Innovation Center. When they called her name, Thomas stood and cheered louder than anyone else in the auditorium. Afterward, in the crowd of celebrating families, someone touched his arm. He turned. His ex-wife stood there, older, but familiar, her hair shorter than he remembered, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Hello, Thomas," Jennifer said. The world narrowed to just the two of them. The noise of the crowd faded. 7 years collapsed into a single moment. "Jennifer, you look good. Better than the pictures. Better than I feared." "Pictures. I've been following the news, the car repair, the fund, everything you've built. I'm Thomas. I'm so proud of you." Those 5 words broke something in him. Thomas felt tears he'd been holding back for 7 years finally surface. "I thought you hated me," he whispered. "I never hated you, not even close. I hated what was happening. I hated watching you suffer and not being able to fix it. I hated feeling helpless while everything fell apart." Jennifer's voice cracked. "But I never ever hated you." Melissa appeared beside them. "I invited her. Hope that's okay." Thomas couldn't speak, just nodded. "There's a cafe nearby," Jennifer said carefully. "Could we talk, the 3 of us?" They sat in a corner booth, coffee cooling between them, years of silence waiting to be addressed. "I should have handled it better," Jennifer started. "The leaving. I should have stayed in contact, made sure you knew where we were. I was so scared, Thomas. Scared of what was happening to you. Scared of what it was doing to Melissa watching her father disappear. Scared of my own powerlessness." "You weren't powerless. You made the right choice. For you, for Melissa. But not for you." "I wasn't in a position to be chosen," Thomas said. I understand that now. You had to protect yourself, protect our daughter. I couldn't ask you to drown with me. You never asked for anything, Jennifer said. That was part of the problem. You just kept taking it all on yourself, shouldering everything alone, refusing help even when I begged you to let me in. Thomas stared at his coffee. I didn't want you to see me fail. You weren't failing. The system was failing you. There's a difference. Didn't feel like a difference at the time. They talked for 3 hours, about the divorce, about the years of silence, about Jennifer's guilt and Thomas's bitterness and Melissa's determination to reconnect what had been broken. I remarried, Jennifer said eventually. 2 years ago. Good man, accountant, stable. Everything we needed back then. Thomas absorbed that. You happy? Happy enough. But I never stopped wondering about you. Never stopped worrying. I'm okay now, Thomas said. Better than okay. I've built something real, something that matters. I know. I've watched every interview, read every article. You're doing what you always wanted, changing the world. Just took a different path than we expected. Melissa excused herself to the bathroom, leaving her parents alone for the first time in 7 years. She's incredible, Jennifer said, watching their daughter walk away. So much like you. That stubborn determination to fix what's broken. She gets that from both of us. Maybe. Jennifer looked at Thomas directly. I'm sorry. For leaving the way I did. For not fighting harder to stay connected. For giving up when things got darkest. You didn't give up. You survived. That's different. Can you forgive me? Thomas considered the question. Forgiveness implied there was something to forgive. But Jennifer had made the only choice that made sense at the time. Had protected herself and their daughter when he couldn't. There's nothing to forgive, he said finally. We both did what we had to do. Jennifer reached across the table, squeezed his hand once, then let go. Thank you for understanding and for becoming someone our daughter is so proud to call her father. When Melissa returned, they talked about lighter things. Her plans for the Innovation Center, Thomas's consulting work, the expansion projects, the future instead of the past. They parted outside the cafe with careful hugs and promises to stay in touch. Thomas watched Jennifer drive away feeling something ease that he hadn't realized was still clenched tight. You okay? Melissa asked. Yeah, Thomas said. I think I am. Back at the Innovation Center Phase 2, construction was accelerating. The additional 100 housing units were taking shape. The business incubator had opened, already hosting 12 social enterprises. The waiting list had grown to 800 people. 800 people who'd heard about what they were building and wanted in. The scale was overwhelming. We can't house everyone, Carol said during a board meeting. We need to accept that, focus on sustainability over growth. Why? Thomas challenged. Why can't we house everyone? Because we don't have infinite resources. Then we get more resources. We prove the model works. We replicate it. We scale it until we can meet the demand. That's not realistic. Neither was fixing a $4 million car with tape and a pencil, but I did it anyway. Marcus intervened. Thomas Carroll's right. We need to stabilize what we have before expanding further. The businesses are generating revenue, but we're not self-sufficient yet. We're still dependent on donor funding. Then we change that, Thomas said. We develop revenue streams that make us independent. We build enterprises that are profitable enough to fund the housing and training programs without relying on charity. That could take years. Then we take years. But we don't stop. We don't cap our capacity because it's hard. We figure out how to make it work. Sarah spoke up quietly. Thomas, I think what people are trying to say is you're pushing too hard. We've accomplished incredible things in 7 months. Maybe it's time to consolidate instead of constantly expanding. Thomas looked around the table. Saw concern. Saw exhaustion. Saw people who'd been running full speed since that day on Sunset Boulevard and were starting to stumble. He saw himself reflected in their faces. "You're right," he said, surprising everyone. "I'm pushing too hard, expecting everyone to operate at crisis pace indefinitely. That's not sustainable." "So we slow down?" Carol asked hopefully. "No. We build systems that don't require crisis pace. We hire more staff, delegate more, create processes that work without everyone being exhausted all the time." Thomas leaned back. "I've been operating like we're still in emergency mode. But we're not. We're building something permanent. That requires different thinking." The relief in the room was palpable. Over the next month, they restructured. Hired 15 new staff members, all from their training program. All people who understood the mission from lived experience. Created department heads. Distributed responsibility. Built organizational infrastructure that didn't depend on Thomas working 18-hour days. It was harder than Thomas expected, letting go, trusting other people to make decisions, accepting that his way wasn't always the best way. But it worked. The Innovation Center stabilized. Operations smoothed out. Stress levels dropped. People started taking days off without everything collapsing. Thomas even bought furniture for his apartment, a bed, a desk, a chair, small steps toward accepting that he lived there now. Melissa started full-time after graduation. She was brilliant, saw patterns in data that everyone else missed, identified inefficiencies, proposed solutions that actually worked. Within weeks, she'd reorganized their intake process and increased efficiency by 40%. "She's better at this than you are," Carol told Thomas one afternoon. "I know," Thomas said, and he meant it as a compliment. The success stories multiplied. James Chen, who'd relapsed 6 months ago, was 9 months sober now and working as a developer for one of their tech consulting clients. Rita had taken a part-time job at the local library, circling back to the career she'd lost 12 years ago. Marcus's moving company had 20 employees, all formerly homeless, all earning living wages. The media coverage continued, but Thomas had learned to manage it better. Let the communications director handle most interviews. Focused his public appearances on policy advocacy rather than personal narrative. He testified before the state legislature about housing policy. Spoke at conferences about economic development. Published op-eds about the false economy of allowing homelessness to persist when intervention was cheaper and more humane. Some people listened, some didn't, but the conversation was changing. Then the call came that changed everything. Thomas was in his apartment reviewing financial projections when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Dr. Johnson, this is Catherine Morrison from the MacArthur Foundation. Do you have a moment?" Thomas sat up straighter. "The MacArthur Foundation, the Genius Grants." "I have a moment. We've been following your work at the Talent Recovery Innovation Center. The model you've developed, the outcomes you're achieving, it's extraordinary. The foundation would like to discuss a significant grant to help you scale the program nationally." Thomas's mind went blank. How significant? 50 million over 5 years, specifically targeted at replicating your model in 10 additional cities. We'd provide technical assistance, help you develop a franchise structure, support local implementations. $50 million, 10 cities, hundreds of housing units, thousands of lives. "Why us?" Thomas asked. "Because you've proven it works. You've built sustainable social enterprises. You've created pathways out of homelessness that don't depend on charity. You've demonstrated that investing in overlooked talent generates economic and social returns. That's exactly the kind of innovation we want to amplify." They talked for an hour. Catherine explained the process, the requirements, the timeline. Thomas took notes, his hand shaking slightly. "We'll need a formal application," Catherine said. "But between us, you're the frontrunner." The committee was unanimous. They want to support this. After they hung up, Thomas sat in his furnished apartment, his home, and tried to process what just happened. National expansion, 10 cities. The model he'd built from a tent city going nationwide. He called an emergency board meeting. Everyone gathered in the community center, the board, the senior staff, Melissa, Anthony on video. Thomas explained the MacArthur opportunity. watched faces shift from disbelief to excitement to fear. "That's huge," Sarah said. "That's game-changing." "But can we handle it?" "Not alone," Thomas admitted. "We'd need to build a national structure, hire regional directors, develop training programs for local implementations. It's a massive undertaking." "It's also an opportunity to prove this works everywhere, not just here," Melissa said. "To show that the problem isn't people, it's systems, and better systems create better outcomes." Carol was already calculating. 50 million over 5 years, that's 10 million annually. Split across 10 cities, that's $1 million per city per year. It's doable if we leverage local funding and resources. "We'd need to ensure quality control," Marcus said. "Make sure places don't just copy the surface without understanding the principles. The community governance, the dignity-first approach, the refusal to pathologize poverty." "We'd need to write a playbook," Thomas said. "Document everything we've learned, create training materials, build a support network for local leaders." Anthony spoke up from the video screen. "I can help with that. Quantum Dynamics has experience scaling operations. We can provide technical assistance, project management expertise, administrative support." The conversation went late into the night, talking through concerns, identifying challenges, building excitement about what was possible. Finally, Carol called for a vote. Do we pursue the MacArthur grant? Knowing it will transform everything, require enormous effort, and potentially fail spectacularly. The vote was unanimous. Yes. Thomas started writing the application the next day. Melissa helped pulling data crafting narratives, building the case for why their model could and should go national. They worked for 6 weeks, created a comprehensive proposal covering everything: governance structures, financial projections, outcome metrics, risk mitigation, local adaptation frameworks. The application ran 200 pages. Thomas submitted it on a Friday afternoon and immediately felt the weight of waiting settle over everything. The MacArthur Foundation said they'd have a decision in 8 weeks. 8 weeks of uncertainty. 8 weeks of wondering if they'd oversold their success or undersold their potential. 8 weeks of second-guessing every word in that proposal. Thomas tried to focus on daily operations, but his mind kept drifting to the possibilities. 10 cities, hundreds of housing units, thousands of people whose lives could change the way his had changed. 6 weeks into the waiting, Jennifer called. "I heard about the MacArthur grant," she said. "Melissa told me. Thomas, that's incredible." "We don't have it yet. You'll get it. I know you will. You've always had this way of making impossible things happen through sheer stubborn determination." Thomas smiled. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation, also a compliment." She paused. "I've been thinking about what you said, about forgiveness, and I realized there's something I need from you." "What?" "I need you to forgive yourself for what happened, for the years on the street, for feeling like you failed us." Her voice was gentle. "None of it was your fault, Thomas. The system failed, circumstances failed. But you survived. You built something extraordinary out of nothing. You became the person who could change things instead of just enduring them. That's not failure, that's transformation." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I don't know how to let go of the guilt." "Then let me help you. Let Melissa help you. Let everyone who loves you remind you that you're worth more than your suffering, that you deserve good things, that comfort isn't betrayal, it's healing." They talked until Thomas's phone battery died. About guilt and shame and the long road from survival to thriving. About the difference between remembering where you came from and being trapped there. After they hung up, Thomas looked around his apartment. At the bed he'd finally started sleeping in. At the desk where he did work that mattered. At the life he'd built from absolute zero. Maybe Jennifer was right. Maybe it was time to forgive himself. The call from MacArthur came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 8 weeks after submission. Thomas was in a meeting with the social enterprise directors when his phone rang. He saw the number and his heart stopped. "I need to take this," he said, stepping outside. Dr. Johnson, Catherine Morrison, I have good news. Thomas closed his eyes. The committee approved your application. $50 million over 5 years pending final contract negotiations. Congratulations, you're going national. He thanked her, got details about next steps, hung up, and stood in the hallway trying to remember how to breathe. Then he walked back into the meeting room. We got it, he said. The room erupted. Cheers, hugs, tears. People who'd been invisible 7 months ago celebrating a $50 million grant to help make sure nobody else had to be invisible either. Carol was crying. Marcus was laughing. Sarah was already on her phone calling board members. Melissa hugged her father. You did it, Dad. We did it, Thomas corrected. All of us. The press conference happened 3 days later. Thomas stood at a podium in front of the Innovation Center, surrounded by residents and staff with cameras from every major news outlet pointed at him. 7 months ago, I was living in a tent behind St. Michael's Shelter, he began. Today, I'm announcing a $50 million partnership with the MacArthur Foundation to bring the Talent Recovery Innovation Center model to 10 cities nationwide. That's not a feel-good story about one person's redemption. That's proof that when you invest in people instead of discarding them, extraordinary things happen. He talked about the model, the community governance, the social enterprises, the dignity-first approach, the refusal to pathologize poverty. We're not saving people, Thomas said. We're creating infrastructure that recognizes brilliance wherever it exists and provides pathways for that brilliance to flourish. We're building systems that acknowledge human dignity as fundamental, not something that needs to be earned through performance. A reporter raised her hand. Dr. Johnson, what do you say to critics who argue this is just welfare with better branding? I say they fundamentally misunderstand what welfare is and what people need. This isn't about providing handouts. It's about creating opportunities for people to contribute, to use their skills, to be economically productive. The social enterprises we've built generate revenue. The people we've housed pay rent. The model is sustainable precisely because it treats people as assets, not liabilities. Another reporter. How do you ensure quality as you scale? What prevents this from becoming diluted as it expands? We're developing a comprehensive training and support system. Every city will have local leadership with lived experience of homelessness. We're not imposing solutions from above. We're equipping communities to solve their own problems using principles that work. The questions continued for an hour. Thomas answered each one backed by data, guided by conviction, refusing to let anyone reduce what they'd built to simplistic narratives. Afterward, Anthony pulled him aside. That was perfect. You've come a long way from the angry man who yelled at city council. I'm still angry, Thomas said. I've just learned how to channel it productively. That's called growth. That's called exhaustion. There's a difference. Anthony laughed. Either way, it's working. You're changing the conversation. That matters. That night, Thomas sat in his apartment with Melissa eating takeout and watching news coverage of the press conference. They're calling you the homeless genius, Melissa said, making a face. I hate that framing. Me too, but if it gets people to pay attention to systemic issues, I'll tolerate being a symbol. You're not a symbol, Dad. You're a person. I'm both now. That's the price of visibility. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Melissa spoke quietly. Are you happy? Really happy? Thomas considered the question. Was he happy? He had an apartment, meaningful work, his daughter back in his life, a reconciliation with his ex-wife, $50 million to expand a program that mattered. But he still carried the weight of 7 years on the street, still felt guilt when he bought things he needed, still struggled with the gap between who he'd been and who he was becoming. I'm getting there, he said honestly. It's a process, but yeah, I think I'm happy, or at least I'm learning how to be. Melissa smiled. That's enough, That's more than enough. The expansion planning started immediately. Thomas and his team spent 12-hour days developing the playbook, creating training materials, designing systems that could be adapted to different cities while maintaining core principles. They identified the 10 target cities, started recruiting local leaders, built partnerships with foundations and government agencies in each location. The work was massive, overwhelming. Sometimes Thomas woke up at 3 a.m. wondering if they'd bitten off more than they could possibly chew. But then he'd remember the tent city, remember the 43 people who'd built community out of nothing. Remember that if they could survive, that they could handle this. 6 months after the MacArthur announcement, the first replication site opened in Detroit. 50 housing units, 3 social enterprises, community governance from day one. Thomas flew out for the opening, stood in front of a crowd of formerly homeless people moving into apartments that would be theirs, and felt the weight of what they were building. "This is just the beginning," he told them. "You're not charity cases, you're pioneers. You're proving that investment in human potential generates returns that benefit everyone. Don't let anyone tell you different." A woman in the crowd raised her hand. "Dr. Johnson, what happens if we fail? If this doesn't work?" "Then we learn from it and try again," Thomas said. "But I don't think you're going to fail. You know why? Because you understand what's at stake in a way comfortable people never will. You've survived what should have destroyed you. That means you have strength most people can't imagine. Use it. Build something nobody can ignore." The Detroit site succeeded, then Chicago, then Atlanta, each one adapting the model to local context while maintaining the core principles. By the end of year 1, they had 5 sites operational, 300 people housed, 47 social enterprises generating sustainable revenue. The data was undeniable. Return on investment averaged 340% when you factored in reduced emergency services, healthcare costs, incarceration expenses. Every dollar invested returned $340 in economic and social benefit. Thomas presented these findings everywhere. Congressional hearings, academic conferences, corporate boardrooms. Slowly, painfully, the conversation shifted. Homelessness wasn't an unsolvable problem. It was a policy choice. And different policies created different outcomes. 2 years after fixing Anthony Wright's hypercar, Thomas Johnson stood in front of the United Nations invited to present the Talent Recovery Innovation Center model as a case study in sustainable development. He wore a suit that fit, spoke with confidence earned through transformation, represented a movement that had grown far beyond him. "The solution to homelessness isn't complicated," he told the assembled delegates. "Provide housing, provide opportunity, provide dignity. Treat people as investments rather than expenses. The returns, economic, social, moral, are extraordinary. The only question is whether we have the courage to do what works instead of what's politically convenient." After the presentation, delegates from 17 countries asked for information, wanted to replicate the model, wanted to prove that invisible people could be seen again if someone bothered to look. Thomas provided everything: the playbook, the data, the training materials, made it all open source, refused to let proprietary interests limit impact. "This isn't about credit," he told his team. "It's about changing systems. If other people can do it better, let them. The goal is fewer people on the streets, not recognition for us." The movement grew. 15 cities, 20, 30. Some succeeded, some struggled, all tried. And slowly the narrative changed. Homelessness shifted from moral failing to policy failure. Investment in people became economically defensible. Dignity became the baseline instead of the aspiration. 3 years after that day on Sunset Boulevard, Thomas Johnson sat in his apartment, fully furnished now with pictures on the walls and books on shelves, and looked at what had been built. Melissa worked as his deputy director, brilliant and fierce, and determined to finish what he'd started. Carol ran finances for a 50-site network, generating $30 million in annual revenue. Marcus's moving company had expanded to 5 cities, employed 300 people, all formerly homeless. The original Innovation Center housed 200 people, ran 18 social enterprises, served as the training hub for national expansion. And Thomas consulted, advocated, taught, and slowly learned how to accept that he'd built something that mattered. His phone rang. "Anthony, turn on the news," Anthony said. Thomas turned on CNN, saw his own face on screen, saw footage of the Innovation Center, heard the anchor say his name. "Breaking news tonight. Dr. Thomas Johnson, founder of the Talent Recovery Innovation Center, has been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work addressing homelessness and economic inequality. The ceremony will take place next month at the White House." Thomas stared at the screen, unable to process what he was hearing. "You deserve this," Anthony said. "You've changed lives, changed policy, changed the way people think about poverty and potential." "I fixed a car with tape and a pencil," Thomas said numbly. "That's all I did." "You did a lot more than that, and now the country's recognizing it." After they hung up, Thomas sat in his apartment and cried. Not from joy, not from pride, from the overwhelming weight of transformation, from invisible to celebrated, from discarded to honored, from tent city to the White House. It was too much, too fast, too unreal. But it was also proof that brilliance could be invisible and still be real. That society could be wrong about who mattered. That one person refusing to accept invisibility could change everything. The ceremony happened on a Tuesday in October, 4 years after that hypercar broke down on Sunset Boulevard. Thomas stood in the White House, surrounded by people who'd once been invisible, receiving the nation's highest civilian honor. The president placed the medal around his neck. Dr. Johnson's work proves that America's greatest untapped resource is the human potential we've been taught to overlook, the president said. He's shown us that investing in people, all people, creates returns that benefit everyone. That's the America we aspire to be. Thomas accepted the medal, gave a short speech, thanked everyone who'd made the journey possible. But the only thing he could think about was Carol and Marcus and Rita, and the 43 people who'd lived in Tent City and built community when the rest of the world looked away. They were his real honor, his real achievement. The medal was just recognition of what they'd proven together. That some brilliant society decided to erase could come back visible. That the next world-changing idea might come from the person everyone was taught to ignore. That systems could change if enough people refused to accept that discarding human potential was inevitable. The story didn't end with applause. It ended with work, with daily operations, with new cohorts, with continued expansion, with the slow, unglamorous process of building infrastructure that made sure fewer people had to choose between survival and dignity. Thomas went back to his office the day after the White House ceremony, put the medal in a drawer, got back to work. Because the real victory wasn't the recognition. It was every person who moved from a tent into an apartment. Every person who went from invisible to employed. Every person who proved that the system's judgment of their worth was wrong. That was the revolution. Quiet, persistent, transformative. One recovered life at a time, and it was just beginning.